Alrighty. As you guys know, we are playing Zoro this week, so I'm going to see exactly what we can do. Someone came to visit. So we are going first. We're on the 1 through 5 curve. I don't have any searchers or events. The only real nice things with the Zoro and the Chopper, I'm going to mulligan this hand away, potentially find some searchers. So we do actually find access to Curly as well, so we're good. He is just whining right now. So my opponent just draws and then passes, so probably have 2 or decent swings. So I think what we'll do, we'll play the Curly, see what kind of 1-drop we can get. We do get Buggy, so we can't find an event potentially, and we do gain access to Radical Beam. I'm going to grab the Radical Beam instead of the Guard Point, because it means that we have the ability to have a 4K counter later on if we do get to 2 life, which, in the sense of what my opponent's playing, it definitely is something that I'm going to want to kind of keep an eye on. But we do have access to things like the Machino as well, so we're in a pretty good spot right now, I'd say. I also apologize if I sound a bit weird. I'm a bit congested right now, so it's a little bit unfortunate. So my opponent is putting cards to the bottom of his deck. Playing against a Venkov is a little bit awkward just because they're so easy to just get super high swings in, but the first swing we are going to take, so we do get Brook. Now Brook can be good, mainly because it becomes a 6k attacker with our buff, 7k with the Dawn attachment, can give minus 2k. I think what I'm going to do now though is just keep cycling through, see if I can find really anything, and then we'll go from there. Let's see. We'll go for 2 5k swings and then a 7k. And then we have quite a bit in hand just so that way we can kind of counter out if we need to. And thankfully the Brook does have counter as well, so my opponent just dumps a card, which is fine. Again, Ivankov gets the draw 2, but it's not the end of the world per se if they do get that, and then we'll just go 7k. If we can force my opponent's hand to actually gain cards, it means that they basically have a leader that's null and doesn't really matter, so it really comes down to how we play it out. So my opponent does play the Inazuma blocker, so if you do have less than, or if you have 1 card or less, it gains plus 2k, so right now it's only a 5k blocker, so it's not too bad. So we'll just get rid of the Tony here. I don't think my opponent's going to be able to do too much. We do have a lot going on in our hands, and we actually do draw another Machino, which means that we have the ability to kind of push through even more. I'm going to play the Brook down now, just so that way I have the ability to benefit from it. And then what we'll do here is we'll just go for a 5k swing into, we'll go 2 5k swings into a 6k. And then what this Brook means is it means that if we draw a Marco off of our life or anything, it means that we have the ability to counteract the blockers and things like that. My opponent is going to be able to kind of benefit from drawing cards or dropping cards out of their hands, so just need to kind of be cautious of that. So we're just putting on as much pressure as we can. My opponent chooses to take, which is great. So now we're in a spot where my opponent really has to target my board rather than my life, which means that I have the chance to build my hand. And looking at my hand, I have a lot of cards. So my opponent is going to be able to trash 2 and bounce a card back to our hand, and it gains double attack if they choose to, but again, it's nothing that's too crazy. My opponent chooses not to, which means that we still have access to the Inazuma only being a 5k at the moment, so if we got a jet pistol that would have been perfect. but unfortunately we didn't. So I think this turn I'm just going to play on the defensive side. Right now, these buggies are at 4k, so we'll 5, 6, 7, 5, 6, 7, 7, leave one open 6. So I could do 3 7k swings and also have a 6k swing, which doesn't sound too bad. So I think what we'll do is we'll just go 5k swing first. My eye is killing me. So we'll go 5k swing first, and then we could play down a Makino to buff, which means that my opponent would have to decide to block, which doesn't sound too bad. But I really do want to keep some of these cards here, but it's okay. I think it's smarter for us to go Makino. So right now this is at 7k. So we can go a 7k swing. My opponent's going to be forced to block or dump 2 cards out of their hand. So opponent counters, gets rid of the Inazuma, which is perfectly fine. I was kind of wanting him to do that. So we're at 6 here. We could go 9. We could go 9 into 7, leave 2 open, or we could go 9 into 8. And the 9 into 8 I actually don't hate too much because my opponent blocked a 7. So he's probably going to have to take cards, which means that we're going to be benefiting from it quite a bit. So we'll do an 8 into 9, leave 1 open for the Radical Beam, just so we can keep putting pressure. So my opponent takes. No trigger for him, and then we'll do a 9k swing, leave 1 open for the Radical Beam. It's just a 2k counter, but if we do take the double attack, then that means next turn we have access to Radical Beam from there. And if the Luffy puts us at 2, Radical Beam's live, which means we have the Dawn open, which means we don't have to worry about Event Cov or the leader Event Covs trying to get through. So there is the Brick Fist. A little bit unfortunate, but it's nothing that's too terrible. It just puts counter power back into our hands. So there's another Event Cov into another Luffy. My opponent not going to be able to draw off of the Event Cov, but it's nothing that's, you know, too out of the realm of possibility. So there is a 7k swing. I'm going to take this 7k just because I want to be able to benefit off of seeing some more cards, and then that way next turn I can actually kind of deplete my opponent of as many things as I can. It's probably going to go for a 7k double attack, bounce a character back to our hand, which is fine. I'm not too worried about that. So there's a 5k swing on the Makino. Again, not terrible. And then my opponent's probably going to just go for a 7k double attack, 8k double attack. And from there, we just have so much combo potential in our hand that I'm not worried about what's going to happen. Because it's 8k, which means that we can just get rid of 2 2ks. So we can go no blocker. We can get rid of the Otama as well as the Jozu. Go to 9k. And then now my opponent has 1 card in hand, which means that we can actually kind of start dealing with his board and then applying even more pressure. So I am not too worried about that. Let's see. So I think to eliminate the possibility of the double attack, let's see, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Let's see. So right now this is at 5 or 4, I'm sorry. So if we put 5 Dawn here and we go 9k, that's a 2k. My opponent has to dump it. So let's let the Monkey D. Luffy go. Just target down my opponent's board, go from there. And then we can actually play down the Buggy. Buggy can grab us the guard point, which is actually something that I was wanting. And from here, I don't think my opponent's going to be able to hit hard enough for lethal next turn. I think we should be fine. I think I'm just going to swing 7. Have my opponent take the life, and then that way next turn, my opponent doesn't play a blocker. We're still okay. So my opponent is able to draw off of the Impel Down All-Stars, but I'm in a position where it's nothing that's too critical for me. My opponent is going to be able to bounce a character back, but he does have to get rid of 2 cards out of his hand. So that means that if he only bounces 1 character back, then I still have 2 swings potentially next turn, which means I only have to deal with a blocker and then go from there. So there's an 8k swing. This 8k, I'm going to let it go through, and we do actually gain access to Jet Pistol, which means we can just get rid of the blocker outright, and then we can go from there. So I think to ensure that we hit lethal next turn, let's see, there's a 3k, so we can bump me to 7 and then 9. Let's see. I need to save this buggy. We'll go no blocker. We'll go Radical Beam to bump to 7. Then we'll just get rid of Otama for 9. Now if my opponent chooses to swing, dump 2, gains double attack, bounce, then we're still in a solid spot because he has to find a way to get rid of this buggy. Now my opponent could go double attack into Ivankov, but we're going to be able to block that too. So there's the Brick Fist. So let's see. My opponent goes double attack. I need to try and find a rusher. I mean, can my opponent stop at 15k next turn? I don't think so. So I'm pretty sure, yeah, I'm fine to take this. I didn't have to take it, but you know, it's extra cards in the hand, so I'm not too worried about it. So my opponent is trashing 2 to pop, and then it's gonna go 7k. I'm gonna take it, see if we can find a rusher. My opponent draws 2, so we do draw Ezo. There's not very much that is gonna go on, so I think we just go 15k, because at most my opponent bumps to 9. Draws a 2k, goes to 11, 13, so I think 15k is the perfect number. So, because if my opponent were to go, from the sense of it, if they were to go Love Love Mellow, it would pump them to 9. And then if their card they drew was a 2k, it'd be 11. Another 2k would be 13. So, they would need 2 more cards to be able to benefit off of that. So, just a quick game. That was game 1. Let's try and get into a game number 2. Alrighty guys, so here we are in game number 2. Looking at this start, considering yellow plays a lot of characters benefit from life, I'm gonna need to be as aggro as possible, so let's play down this Ezo. We'll get the Fire Fist. Fire Fist is actually gonna be super solid in this matchup, considering my opponent gets a lot of triggers that can play cards, so Fire Fist will allow us to deplete the board of a ton of resources, and then next turn we can actually have a pretty, not aggro turn, but a decent turn when it comes to everything. My opponent plays Charlotte Pudding. Looking at the top 4, going to be able to grab a Big Mom Pirates card. Again, we need to just be as aggro as possible, that way my opponent doesn't benefit as much from hitting those yellow matchups, or hitting those yellow characters on board that rip us a life and gain them a life. So from here, we're just going to do 2 5k swings with Zoro and Zoro, and we do have a couple 2ks in hand, which means we can potentially save our Zoro to apply even more pressure. So our opponent is going to be able to manipulate our life or his life, so my opponent chooses to take. Doesn't get a trigger, thankfully, so we don't have to worry about any Charlotte Crackers or anything being played down. That would be a bit unfortunate with the double attack applying so much pressure, so we just have to hope that when it comes down to it, our opponent doesn't swing too heavy into the Zoro and we can actually deal with it. So my opponent uses Buzzcut Mochi, so does get to KO the Zoro. We've talked about Buzzcut Mochi before. It's a pretty solid card, especially when you're playing against something that's aggro like Zoro. So So my opponent looks at their own life. They choose to leave it at the top, so they are going to get a trigger off of that most likely. And my opponent decides to pass. So I think what we're going to do here is just kind of try and build our board. So we'll play the curly. We do get access to Tony Chopper, which means that we can play down the buggy. Buggy can grab us a radical beam. Again, I could have grabbed Fire Fist, but the radical beam is going to serve a bit more of a purpose. And then we'll just go for a 6k swing into playing down the chopper. And then this gives us access to a lot of things next turn. Considering that we'll be at 7 next turn, it means we can go Jet Pistol into Fire Fist. So there's the power. So my opponent... Did my opponent take? My opponent did take. So... Or I'm sorry, my opponent used Power Mochi, so... countered and then went from there. So we'll play down the chopper. And then next turn, depending on what my opponent plays, we have access to Fire Fist plus Jet Pistol. We have a couple 2Ks in hand, so we have a pretty offensive turn. Next turn, if we choose to, we have a bunch of swings, or if we play on the more defensive route to clear my opponent's board, we have access to things like Fire Fist and Jet Pistol, where we have resources, so... My opponent is looking at their own life. We get to 7k, and this 7k, we are going to take this. And give me just one quick second. Cat's nails are stuck in the window. Alright, I am back. So my opponent plays down the Daifuku. So when attacking, you may add 1 card to the top or bottom life of your hand. Place up to 1 card from the top of your deck to your life area. So this we can get rid of, actually. So we have 7 to work with. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to Jet Pistol. We're going to attach 1. We're going to have a 5k swing into a 6k and then play down another Tony Chopper, just so that way we can make sure that my opponent can't really do too much. And then go from there. Yellow's a really awkward matchup because you have to play it super, like, in the moment. So we're going to see what my opponent wants to do. So they choose to counter, which is fine. My opponent's losing hand resources, so I'm not too worried about that. So we have a 6k swing. We're going to be able to get 2 blockers out. And the next turn, considering we'll be at 9 Dawn, means that we're going to be able to get a lot of swings through. And then also have some Dawn open for Radical Beam and counter and things like that. My opponent is at 8, so I do need to be wary of the Charlotte Lin that my opponent can play. The 7-drop one that'll force me to either give them a life or rip a life. And speaking of it, there it is. So I'm going to trash the top of my life just so that way my opponent doesn't benefit, because I am in a super solid position when it comes to kind of dealing with the board. My opponent is going to be at 10 next turn, so they can play the big Charlotte Lin, in which case they rip one of my lives and go from there. So let's see. So my opponent is attacking Curly to Dawn. I'm going to just use a Tony Chopper because the Curly is going to be able to apply pressure next turn. And we do actually get an EZO, which means we can search for another event, which means that we do have access to Jet Pistol, or I'm sorry, not Jet Pistol, a Whitebeard Pirates card. But sadly, we can't get any, which is unfortunate, but it's not the end of the world. So we're just going to go in, go for the couple 5k swings, go from there. We are at 2, so we can actually potentially be in a solid spot next turn. So Soul Pocus, really annoying card. So we're just going to trash 1 from our life. Again, we need to just be as aggressive as possible. So we're going to go for a 5k swing again. And then with this buggy, we'll go to 7. And we'll just see what my opponent can do. So we'll go... We can go 6 into 7, leave 1 open. Which doesn't sound terrible. So yeah, we'll go 6 into 7k with the buggy. Force my opponent to either take it. I need to try and get my opponent to no life this turn. Which means if I can do that successfully, then the following turn, I just go for a big lethal play. So my opponent takes it. So now if they get the Lin out, I'm in a bit of an awkward spot. But it's not the end of the world. So... Okay, so what was my opponent's trigger there? I discard 2 cards, add up to 1 card. Okay. So my opponent plays the big Lin next turn. I'm in a really awkward spot because I run into the potential of my opponent being at 2 life again. And so, alright, so this is where things get a little bit dicey. I'm going to have to trash the top of my life. And I'm going to have to counter out of my mind this turn. So there is the Brûlé blocker. So the Brûlé we can't actually deal with. So there is a 2 into 2. I'm not too worried about that. The 2 into 2. We can just get rid of a Jozu here. I need to make sure that next turn I can apply as much pressure as possible. So... And that might even resort to being attacking with Tony Chopper if we have the ability to. So my opponent just passes. My opponent has no Dawn open, so the most that they have is 2 2Ks. So I need to go as in as possible. So this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna go 5k. So my opponent takes. So no trigger. So now we should be able to win. With this, we just go 5. My opponent's gonna have to dump a card. 5 here, dumps a card, blocks. So, and my opponent seems to have blocked. So here we'll just go 5k. Doing the little attacks, but just enough so that way we can actually get through my opponent's defenses. My opponent counters to 7. So now what we can do is we can go 5k with the Tony Chopper. My opponent concedes, and then from there we take the dub. So with that being said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's video. If you did enjoy it, smash that like button, subscribe, turn on post notifications. Otherwise, I will catch you guys in tomorrow's battle videos. Later.